Good morning, good evening, and good night to all. This is Reading in Solitude, and I'm your host of Reading in Solitude. How can original characters change the way in which we look at fanfiction? Original characters are a type of character present in fanfiction and roleplays. This is because these are works that are derivative from another work, and as such, it is necessary that we make such a distinction. Oftentimes, original characters are looked down upon in many ways. To ask if an original character should be a protagonist of your fanfiction is oftentimes seen as an absurd idea. But I don't think that having an original character be the center of your fanfiction is necessarily such a bad idea. You see, it all comes down to how you view fanfiction and how you write your fanfiction. The other day, I tried explaining to a friend of mine what fanfiction is, and I came up with this analogy. When some of you were younger, I imagine that you may have had yourselves a box of toys to play with. With these toys, you might have set up whatever scenes or games you wanted to that day. This is, I think, the same as writing a fanfiction, where you have a box of toys or the various source materials that you're familiar with, and you make scenes and games using those. That is, you make your fanfiction. You can combine these toys or these source materials in any way that you so choose. You can mix and match them as you please, or keep them separate. Now, publishing your fanfiction to the internet is kind of like inviting other people to come play with you, or I suppose more appropriately, it is inviting others to watch the scene which you've put together, or the scene that you wish to play with. When you play on your own, you have more freedom to do whatever you would like in your games and in your scenes, but when you invite others to watch while you maintain those freedoms, you cannot act so selfishly and expect others to enjoy watching you. While you might love the idea of writing a story about you and your waifu or husbando falling in love and doing lewd things together, other people probably aren't going to want to read about you specifically. It is not to say that there aren't going to be people to read such a story, that you won't have any audience whatsoever, but either those will be people of morbid curiosity, or those who just want to see their favorite character, getting it on in some way. But for the most part, doing this is kind of like inviting others to watch you gorge yourself in front of them. It's just seen as gluttonous and as kind of disgusting in a way. No matter how enjoyable it is to yourself, most sensible people will not really care to watch it, and in other words, they won't really care to consume of your story. This is the issue I think most people have with original characters. The fact of the matter is that many seem to just be self-inserts with very little self-restraint shown. I make this clarification because I don't necessarily disavow all usage of self-inserts, so long as the tool is used in a reasonable way and you are relatively realistic with your abilities and your character. If you can be such, writing a character based off of yourself or endowed with characteristics of yourself is not terrible. Writing a narrative starting with the perspective of what you would do in a given situation isn't necessarily a bad idea, as long as you can be honest with who you are as a person, and as long as you can use that tool in a relatively tasteful way. With that being said, most people aren't able to do this, and so it is kind of a practice that is frowned upon. The issue of characters not having self-restraint, or essentially writing out power fantasies, or whatever other sort of fantasies, goes back to what I said before. People will see this as gluttonous or as overly indulgent to yourself, and most people really just don't want to read that, which is why I think a lot of people don't like original characters. When you realize that most people's issues with original characters comes down to poor development, you start to realize that this is actually true across the board. If you poorly develop or characterize established characters from your source material, people will just as well not be interested in reading such a piece of material. They will be disappointed in your portrayal of their favorite characters. For example, were you to write a story about Tatsumaki, who's a character that I actually quite enjoy, but you were to remove her superpowers, make her not be sassy or prideful, and turn her into a cashier at Walmart, I wouldn't really care to read the story because the story would not be about Tatsumaki. It would rather be about somebody with the likeness or the image of Tatsumaki. For me, that's not really my favorite part of her character. I think she has a nice design as a character, but I think more importantly is the character that is her, who she is as a person, so to speak. And this is an issue that you see in all types of fan fiction, where people use characters only in their likeness for a number of reasons. One of these reasons, I think, is because people have a fear of creating new characters to be in their fan fictions. That is to say, they have a fear of using original characters because of their poor reception. So they change existing characters to fit the character lineup that they need to create the story that they want. Again, I think this is a bad practice, and in total truth, I have done the same in the past. Take the story that I published recently, Pardon Our Laughter. Now, the reason I went ahead and published it is because that's actually just a first draft of this story that I plan on writing, and in the second draft, I wound up removing Yuri from the story. Going back to the idea of people being afraid to use original characters, I think one of the reasons that people are afraid to use these characters is because people too heavily associate fanfiction with the characters found in the source material. You see, stories are made up of many different things. They are one part made up of those characters, but also they are made up of the setting in which the story takes place. One thing which fanfiction allows us as writers to do is explore the worlds in which these stories take place. For example, have you ever wanted to learn more about what life might be like for the people in the Azur Lane or in the Contact Collection universes, where man is banished from the seas and thus is also banished from the skies above water? How would people get along and cope about living mostly with the land that they have and those who are adjacent to their land for survival? What about writing about what the life might be like in the wake of your favorite action-adventure hero's quest? These are some ideas that might lead one to wish to explore an already established universe to a further extent. But how can we explore things outside the scope of the main character's story? Well, we might use side characters from the source material, or alternatively, we can use our own original characters to gain a new perspective that is adjacent, intersecting, or even completely separate from that of the original story. So yes, you don't actually have to use original characters in all cases. Sometimes you can get away with just using side characters or minor characters from a source story. But sometimes you can't use side characters either because they are absent from the story that you are writing a fanfiction about, or because their personalities are not quite there to be used to explore the universe in the way that you want to explore this universe. That is where it is important to be open to using original characters. Another way in which original characters can be used is in the form of parody. Satire may use aspects of a world from another story, or a set of ideas from that story, as well as some of the characters from that story with which the writer wishes to satirize. But in some cases, it may be better or it may be helpful to use original characters to properly show the things in the story that were missed out, not touched upon, or even to use these characters as foils to existing characters in order to highlight flaws or to highlight ideas that the author of the satire disagrees upon with the author of the source material. I think I really started to think about this a little more deeply when I got to working on writing a new story, something which I will be talking about soon, and I was conflicted with the idea of using an original character as the protagonist to this fanfiction. I ultimately decided to do so, again for reasons that I will discuss later on next week. In researching this topic, I was actually rather interested to learn how many stories out there are inspired by other stories, and I think that might be a good topic for discussion next week. But with all that being said, I hope you're all well, and I bid each of you a good night.